Support for the Dice Tower comes from listeners like you and from the Op, also known as USAopoly. Thanks for your support. The Dice Tower, episode 673.
Flora games.
Welcome to the Dice Tower, a podcast about board games and card games, and especially the people who play them. On today's show, Tom and I go on a surprise discussion of the evolution of escape games whilst talking about some recent game sessions. Also, Geoff tests the contact hypothesis, we answer questions from the mailbag, and we cultivate our top 10 Flora games. I'm Eric Summerer, and here's your host, the Audrey 2 to my Seymour Krelborn, Tom Vassell.
Feed me, Seymour.
Does it have to be human?
Nah, tacos are good.
It's a very accommodating evil plant.
Hey, I was just telling this to somebody else that I saw that Rick Moranis is coming back.
To the world of acting? Yeah, he's doing a Honey, I Shrunk the Kids sequel, right?
That's correct. That's actually big news for those of us who like his nerdness, because he's been out for, I think, almost 2 decades or more.
Indeed. Yeah.
That would be neat if they could remake the Little Shop of Horrors.
I mean, that movie is almost perfect as it is, especially if you add the real ending.
We're getting off topic here. Folks, this is a board game show, and this is Dice Tower on the road. So if my audio seems off, that's why.
You're hanging out in a hotel room. Sounds like we've done some TotalCon episodes like that.
That's true. And actually rushed to the store today because some wires weren't working and stuff.
Ooh.
So hopefully everything is working fine. But if not, anything we say, even the content,
we can blame on that.
Any mistakes, even on Eric's side, are because I'm in a hotel. I'm dropping my daughter off at college.
Yes.
Which is a little less involved when the coronavirus is happening.
It's basically like curbside drop-off now, right?
You kick them out and keep driving. Not
you have 2
quite.
minutes. Move.
Although, one thing did make me laugh. We stopped somewhere. We were going through checkpoints and on the college, and they said, do you have any of these symptoms to her? And then they said, blah, 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 and they checked her temperature. And I said, do you need to check my temperature? And they're like, and nobody was like, no. And I thought, really? Okay. It just seemed like an odd. I didn't think that was too much to ask.
Right, but you weren't entering the building, right? It really was curbside drop-off.
I get it, but I was in the same car with her.
That's true.
But anywho, so games are everywhere. I'm telling you, there's just new games being released like crazy. I am playing more games, I think, than ever before, and still can't keep up.
Yes, indeed. It seems like we had sort of a hesitancy a few months ago for releasing things, and now publishers are just like, you know what? Here they come. We're doing it anyway.
That's the truth of it. Not to mention the Kickstarters were all delayed, and now they're coming in.
Yes. So
speaking of Kickstarters, there's a really hot expansion on Kickstarter right now for a game Eric's about to talk about.
Oh, yes. I forgot that was currently happening. My first game to talk about is called Endangered. It's designed by Joe Hopkins, and it's published by Grand Gamers Guild. Endangered is a cooperative game about saving animals. The base game comes with 2 scenarios. There is a tiger scenario and a sea otter scenario. I think there was a panda scenario that came with the Kickstarter, but I don't have that one. So I don't know.
I think a total of 3.
Yes. So the base box comes with 2. Endangered is this co-op where the ultimate goal is to persuade ambassadors to vote yes to save the animals that you are trying to save. And you are trying to influence these ambassadors through various mechanisms of the game while keeping the animals safe. Because if your entire population of animals dies out, then what's the point? You have lost. The main mechanism of the game is a dice placement sort of thing. There are various action spaces around the board, and on your turn, you're going to roll your dice. You have 3 of them, and you'll place them on the various action spaces, but the twist is that you have to place a higher number than the dice that are already on that space, and those dice don't get removed until the beginning of your turn. So it is possible that you might not have the proper roll to take the action that you want to take. There's all sorts of mechanisms and special powers for re-rolling your dice, but it's all about sort of spreading your dice out and maybe not spending the high die until you have to, leaving actions open for your teammates. And the turn order is sort of variable as well. Everybody takes a turn, and then you get to decide who's going to take the next turn for the next round of the game. Some of the stuff you're doing is moving the animals around the board. You are raising money. You are influencing these ambassadors. They all start the game face down, so you don't even know what they're looking for at the beginning of the game. And by placing influence cubes on them, you'll flip them over, and it says, so the Japanese ambassador wants to see a number of cubes plus the number of mating pairs on the board. I'm not sure if that's the actual power. This is just an example. And you add those together, and if you reach the target number, Japan says yes. And at the end of a certain number of rounds, it's based on the number of players, they vote. And if you get 4 yeses out of the 6 possible ambassadors, you win the game. If you don't, you get 1 more year to fix it. And then if you fail, you've lost. At the end of every every player's turn, there's going to be a bad stuff happens, as many of these co-ops do, where you reveal a card from the nasty deck that's different for each of the animals. So there's a tiger deck and there's a sea otter deck, and these are various effects that might cause animals to die out or pollution to encroach or some sort of bad effect, sometimes good effects. There's also a mating mechanism where if you have pairs on the board, they can create new animals. There's also a pollution or deforestation or nasty stuff step where the habitat is going to shrink in some way, possibly killing off the animals that you're trying to protect. So you're faced with this dilemma of keeping the animals alive, but also getting that influence and flipping those people, the ambassadors over, so you know how to win the game. And that's ultimately where my kids had trouble with this. They wanted to save the animals and keep them alive and keep their habitat going, but we didn't focus on the ambassadors early enough. And so eventually we didn't know what we needed to do to win. And when we got to the voting rounds, we just didn't have enough done in order to get that win. So they were turned off by Endangered. I then played solo with the other scenario, the sea otter scenario. You simply just play with 2 characters. With that in mind, knowing that I'd have to focus on those ambassadors, and while it was still a tricky challenge, I had an easier time of it and sort of got that focus right, playing by myself. I wish there were more than just 2 animals in this base box. I know that was a Kickstarter bonus. Maybe a 3rd one would make me happy. And as you said, Tom, there is an expansion available or on Kickstarter right now that will add more animals to the system. It's actually billed as a service
there's
system.
Like at least 5, I think maybe 6. The expansion seems to double the amount of content.
That's a lot. So yeah, playing with more animals, I think, would be much more fun to explore. I want to see more than what I have in this box with just the 2 animals. But it's an interesting system. It did not click with my kids. I think that it's a little more clinical and analytical. There's you have to do a lot of discussion. How are we going to influence these ambassadors? Once you have them revealed, there's a lot of planning that has to go into your turns. You can't just play loose with this and say, all right, I think I'm going to run in, I'm going to save these tigers, and I'm going to do this and this, because that can really mess with everybody else's plans. So you really do, you almost have to have meetings in order to play Endangered well. I liked it, not so much for my kids. Endangered from Grand Gamers Guild.
Alrighty, well, I'm going to talk about a game I did play with my kids that was cooperative, and that's Last Defense. So this is from the Funko Games department, and it's a very, very, very simple game where you're defending a city against aliens, giant robots, a giant blob, things like that. And all it is on your turn, you roll 2 dice. You move up to the number of spaces on the one die, and you draw cards that it shows on the other die. And you're moving around the city, revealing rubble that shows you different cards you need to clear that rubble. Once you clear the rubble, you get a scientist. Once you get a couple scientists, you can defeat the monsters. The game is controlled by an app. The app is 20 minutes long. It has news reporters going off that tell you at random moments where monsters show up, and they move around and they can mess you up. There is no complications to this game at all. It is just simple, fast. It reminds me very similar to Escape. I don't think it's as stressful as Escape, but it is silly and fun, and I think kids especially will enjoy it. That's it. It's just a simple 20-minute game. Last Defense.
Okay. Cool. Next for me is The Curious Stairs of Mr. Hinks, which may sound familiar. A few episodes ago, I talked about The Curious Elevator of Mr. Hinks. This is a puzzle game from Bluefish Games. It's sort of the little brother to The Curious Elevator of Mr. Hinks. It comes in a cardboard box that is maybe just a little bit bigger than one of those Tiny Epic games. It's not a very big box at all. This is an app-driven puzzle game. You are progressing through a series of floors, and inside the box is like a whole array of stuff. There are brochures, there's a video game instruction manual, there's some papercraft items. Much like the Curious Elevator game, this has a lot of varied ways to provide clues to you. This is a little more straightforward than the Curious Elevator. The Curious Stairs is a little simpler, although some of the puzzles did give me a little bit of trouble. And what I do like about this system is that there's a very generous hint system. There's no timer. You're not timed. There's no like fail condition. You just play until you're done. And if you want a hint, you get a hint. You are not penalized in any way. And the hints are very progressive. Like the first one is, here's the stuff you're going to need. And then the second is more of a little nudge. And the third is a little bit more of a nudge. And then they give you one of the answers. And then they nudge you again. And so there's like 12 hints for each particular level of the game, which I find nice because sometimes I don't want to be given the answer. I just want you to sort of guide me in the right direction. And I never had to jump to the end in figuring out the puzzle. I always sort of got in the right position from some of the other clues, which I appreciated. I really enjoyed this one. I think if you were at all interested in those escape puzzle style games, this one, I guess, feels a little like Exit as far as the use of materials. So it's a little similar there. I think you can find it at hinkselevator.com, which is Hinks, and both the elevator and the stairs are available there. The Curious Stairs of Mr. Hinks. I liked it.
You know, I'm now at the point where I'm thinking that we might be this genre, which I love. All right, so don't get upset with me for saying anything otherwise. I wonder if we're starting to get tapped out, or at least the boundaries are starting to get stretched. Now, this happens with almost anything. Something new comes out. Dominion brings deck building. A new roll and write game that starts a genre. And after a while, you're like, I've seen this before. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we might be there, at least slightly, with roll and writes.
Mm.
So I just played a new... did I say roll and writes? With escape room games. Sorry.
I thought you were just taking us on a right turn.
No. I'm not an anti. I already have enough of that. Tom's against roll and writes. I'm not. But what I am against is flooding a genre with a gazillion games, and then because I like that genre, having to say all these games are good. That's where I run into the problem.
I see. Yeah.
Like, I like tacos, but that doesn't mean I have to say every taco I have is good. And...
Yep.
And so thus be it on the same thing here with these escape room games. I love escape room games. In fact, I have, I think, 4 of them in my suitcase I brought with me. I could play them, solo or something or other.
Yeah, I played this one solo, by the way, yes.
I played this break in Alcatraz, which is the hook of this one was, hey, we're going to break into the box.
Okay.
So you break into Alcatraz. Great. But unfortunately, the methods that they had, so when you, to see if you got a puzzle right, there's 7 sticks in this game, which are just basically strips of paper that are laminated. And you have to find a symbol, which is on the top of one of these sticks, and then a color, which is a line on this stick, and then a number, which is a spot on the board. And then you slide the stick in to that color. That's the right stick. And then it will show you a symbol. And if you find the right symbol, you draw a card or what have you.
Okay, sure.
It works okay. It's clunky. But it's obvious that they were like, we can't use a color wheel like exit games.
Yeah.
So we got to do something different. I mean, it is literally the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's literally the same thing as that wheel is. And so on one hand, I see games going sideways like that. And on the other hand, you see the unlock games seemingly getting better every time.
Yeah.
Finding new ways because they've established their parameters and now they're working within those parameters.
Yes, and the challenge of not making it too samey forces them to push the envelope a little bit.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm still interested to play these. If you give me a new one, I'll be like, yeah. But I'll tell you, if I play one I don't like, I'm very hesitant to play any more in that series.
Have you found in any of these where, like, there's a puzzle that, you know, the game is like, oh, yes, we've tricked you. We've led you down this amazing puzzle. And you're like, yeah, Exit did that, like, 2 years ago.
Yes. At trying not to be too open, but the whole is something inside the box. That's been done now, folks. And yes, there's the whole just simple things like there's a lot of things when I get a puzzle, I'll automatically do. Can't figure out what I'm looking at, turn it upside down. Mm-hmm. And it's how puzzles work. That's how you get good at puzzles. The general gist of things. So I can't get upset. And it doesn't bother me if they copy someone else because you can't play you shouldn't have to have played every escape room game out there before you make your own.
That's true. Yeah. And these are all good, techniques for playing in-person escape rooms as well.
But I will say that for me, I played this break in Alcatraz, and I'm actually just since we're talking about it, I might as well stick it on here.
Sure.
And also, was it the last episode? You weren't on that one where I talked about Escape the Dollhouse. I forget which one that was.
No, I think you talked, or maybe you were telling me about it off air.
I was telling you about it off air because I was telling you it was way too hard for your kids compared to the first two, which were like made for kids almost.
Yeah, they went darker here. I've pre-ordered that one. This is the new Escape Room the Game, which is from Think Fun, and it's actually like a 3D dollhouse, but it's supposed to be very spooky, scary, disturbing.
Yeah, it is. It's not awfully. When you take sound effects and things out of a game, they're not as scary, right? At least for me. But yeah, it is spooky. But not only was that, it's also quite difficult. And this break in Alcatraz had some puzzles that I found to be difficult. And I'm also starting to wonder about the 3D aspect of these puzzles. So, for example, break in Alcatraz has this thing where you are following. It's just a puzzle that's like a pen and paper puzzle, right? Whatever. Like this typical pen and paper puzzle type thing. But it's wrapped around some walls, and you have to like pick the whole thing up and bend your neck and curve your neck and stuff to do it. And that presents a couple problems. One, it means if Eric's doing it and we're in the same game, I just kind of sit there and watch Eric do it.
That's true, yep.
And two, it also makes it harder than it needs to be, but purely from a technical standpoint.
Yeah, you've solved the puzzle, like, mentally, but now you have to physically do it.
Right, and that was some of the problems I had. There was a few puzzles in the Dollhouse one where I had to, I knew how to solve them. I knew what it was to do it, but I just couldn't. I mean, after like following all the hints, I still couldn't do it because it was either a physical challenge that was tricky to do, or it just, I couldn't figure out the numbers or whatever the thing would be. And so I'm just concerned about these escape room games. One, most of them don't seem to really care about the number of people playing. They seem like they're best played with 2, almost always.
Yeah,
because
it's good to have that extra mind involved, but there's rarely enough stuff for like an entire table of 4 or 5 to be involved.
That's why I like the werewolf ones. The werewolf ones I like a lot, and I think that's why Unlock does better for me, because Unlock usually has all the cards sitting out in front of everybody.
Yes.
And everyone's looking at the cards, saying which ones am I going to work with. And yes, you sometimes will pick up a card and examine it closely. Mm-hmm. But I'm telling you, I've really come around on it because I want to play games with people.
Yep.
I don't mind doing them on my own, but there's such a huge gamut of games in this thing right now. I've got escape room games now that a couple I've kickstarted and a couple have been sent to me. We're opening up the box and I don't even know where to start. It's just a pile of stuff.
Ah, yeah.
I backed one on Kickstarter and it's really awesome, but I finally feel like, oh, this is a puzzle. I start working on it and like, well, I can't finish it. Do I have all the information? I don't know. And I don't want to have to go online to find some chat room or Discord or area to do this. I like having a nice book of clues or some way to get clues to solve something.
Yeah.
And I also don't want them to be super easy, but I want to at least feel like I'm a little smart.
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act.
That was a really long roundabout way there. I did not mean to have an episode here themed on escape room games.
Yes.
It's just that I still really like them, but I'm being more finicky with each one.
Okay.
I want to feel like it brings something new, but it needs to do so in a clear way. And that's almost at odds.
Okay.
Like, do something different, but don't be confusing. So... Yeah. Anyway, so the one I played was called Breaking Alcatraz, which I think people might like. It's very historical. It almost follows the plot of the movie/book that the Clint Eastwood was in. About breaking out Alcatraz. That's okay, Eric. People who watch good movies will know.
The Birdman of Alcatraz?
No, that's a different movie. But anyhow.
Con Air.
No, it's called Escape from Alcatraz. What is wrong with you?
Okay.
Con Air. No, and it's not Con Air. You're thinking of The Rock.
Mystic Pizza.
Stop. You're embarrassing both of us. Okay, so no, but anyway, you're breaking into the prison to break out of it, essentially. And so it's essentially a box. And once you find enough clues, it's like you go to the next level. Then you open that box and inside there's more stuff. And you open that and it unfolds into different pieces. And I think it's made to put back together. But again, just like the Dollhouse game, I'm like, I don't got the effort to do that.
Oh, yeah.
It just seems like a lot of work. And there were a few puzzles in it, which I clearly thought would have been a whole lot easier if I could have just drawn on them with markers and stuff to solve it rather than using my finger. It's like when you get a big maze in a maze book.
Yeah.
But you can only use your finger. That's kind of tricky. Or doing Sudoku, but do it in your head.
Yes. Yeah, no, I definitely hear what you're saying. And resetting these, it can sometimes be a pain. I think I've got the werewolf experiment, which I think you alluded to earlier, that I want to reset so that I can, give it to someone else to play. And I just haven't gone. There's like instructions and all sorts of things
you
to
print stuff out too.
Yeah, and I just
put it back together. And I'm like, you know what? No, I'm playing the game, and then I'm done with it. Unless it's one that can be replayed, like the Unlock games, or the ones from there's a few of them that can be played over and over again. The series from DV games, Deckscape,
which is another good one for groups. As Suzanne has mentioned on the show, often the deck is split into like 3 or 4 piles, which is great for multiple groups to be looking at because you can split them up and then trade them. And, it's easier for a larger group to look at everything.
Yes. So actually, I may go through and rate them all. I mean, I did a top 10 of my favorites and stuff, but I think I may do a definitive ranking them all at some point because I will keep playing them, you know.
That was a rather long way to get to I'll keep playing them.
Yeah, alrighty. So that was Eric talking about the curious stares of Mr. Hinks.
Which is replayable, by the way. You can put it all back in the box and give it to somebody else.
I'll have to try that one then. And then break in Alcatraz. All right. What else you got, Eric?
Well, speaking of doing something new with a genre, last for me is Tiny Epic Galaxies Blast Off. Now, many people know that Tiny Epic Galaxies is my favorite of the Tiny Epic games. This is by Scott Almes, just like the original was. Blast Off is sort of a distilled version of Tiny Epic Galaxies, and it almost looks like it has been packaged to appeal to like a mass market. Like I could see this on the shelf at Target, and it's a much more like the original Tiny Epic Galaxies is just sort of just the logo and space, but this has much more cartoony art. It's got a planet that looks like all sorts of stuff is going on, and a more cartoony font, and things are just sort of jumping off the box at you. It is basically the same game as Tiny Epic Galaxies. There are only 6 dice instead of 7. It's a smaller deck of planets, but it uses the same general mechanisms. You're going to roll a certain number of dice on your turn. You can spend energy to re-roll them. Other players can spend culture to follow your actions, and you are collecting resources, the energy and the culture. You are moving up tracks in order to colonize planets. You're flying your ships around, and you're upgrading your civilization, your galaxy, to get more dice, get more ships, get more points. And it's ultimately a race to 21 to see who... Well, that ends the game, and then you count to see who has the most points. This plays very fast. I would say 20 minutes or so. It moved quickly. The only major difference from a gameplay perspective, and this is the major difference, it's still a minor difference. I talked about this following mechanism, which keeps everybody involved. If it's my turn and I'm doing actions one at a time, placing my dice on this little board, Tom can spend his culture points to basically use one of those dice as if it was his own. This new version only allows the first 3 dice that you spend to be followed. So there actually is this system where if I roll like the upgrade die, and I know Tom's got the resources to upgrade his civilization, I don't want him to be able to do that on my turn. I can wait to use that die until the 4th or later die that I am playing that turn so that Tom can't follow it. It offers some different decisions because now you're watching which dice are being placed early and saying, well, do I want to spend my culture points to follow those? Because I might not get a chance to do the thing I want to follow later in the turn. So that is interesting. But if you already own Tiny Epic Galaxies, and especially if you already own and enjoy the expansions to Tiny Epic Galaxies, this is not really a good purchase for you. This is basically the same game with much more clear icons. It doesn't have text on the cards. All the effects are sort of simplified. This is much more of a intro point to the series. This is something that you'd buy as a gift to give to a new player, something that I'm sure Gamelin Games is trying to put on the shelf of mass market stores to draw in new players to the system. If you already know and love Tiny Epic Galaxies, this really isn't the product for you. But for an entry point, it's very well produced. That is Tiny Epic Galaxies Blast Off.
Speaking of Tiny Epic Galaxies Blast Off, let's talk about a real-life version of that, and it's Apollo, a game inspired by the NASA moon missions. Now, this is a game you can get at your, I think Target has it. It is a cooperative game, and in this game, you're trying to get to the moon and back.
Okay.
You can also play a Gemini mission in it. That's more of a warm-up mission. But in this game, it's 2 or more players. One person is mission control always, and the other players are the astronauts working together to accomplish various missions. These missions are going to be them rolling a bunch of dice. You get to roll a certain amount of dice depending on your life support currently. The dice you roll, you can assign them to different areas, but you never have enough dice. So some systems on the ship are going to be consistently taking damage, but you're never quite sure how much damage everything has. Only flight control knows that. And flight control and the players have limited communication. Now, this isn't that stupid limited communications that some games have. This means you really can't talk unless you use a communication disc. And these discs can be given, the players can use those, and then even then you can only give certain amounts of information. Like, oh, this system's gone critical, or this system needs this help, things like that. But it does make the game interesting and fun, and it's all about the players are working together to assign the right discs to the right spots. But at various points, Mission Control's keeping track of all the systems. Sometimes a system will break down, and the astronauts can't do anything till the flight control quickly attaches like a Tetris type. They have to put some pieces on a board connecting these two things back together to get that system back up and running. They're monitoring experiments that the players have to do while they're on the trip. It is not overly difficult as a cooperative game. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's, compared to today's modern crop of let's make games so hard no one can ever do them. It's not like that, but it is a great game for the mass market. I'm really happy with it. It's very thematic, has great components. I like everyone working together, but also that one person being mission control. It's just a lot of fun, and I hope that you could, if you go to a NASA museum or something, that you would find this kind of game there.
Cool.
So that's Apollo, a game inspired by the NASA moon missions.
All right. We always say that gaming brings people together, and Geoff has a segment that puts that assertion to the test.
3, 2, 1, go.
It's time for Game Tech with Geoff Engelstein, where we find out how games really work.
In 2014, ISIS captured the Iraqi city of Mosul. This resulted in a genocidal attack against religious minorities, including Yazidis, Shia, and Christians. About 100,000 Christians fled to Iraqi Kurdistan, and many believe that their Muslim neighbors were complicit in the raids. Now, these suspicions have discouraged Christians from returning to the now liberated areas, and tensions have further increased as Muslims have been moving into Christian enclaves. Muslim-Christian relations in northern Iraq continue to be marked by mutual distrust and social segregation. In the aftermath of the war, researcher Salma Musa from Stanford saw an opportunity. She got involved in setting up new soccer leagues that were primarily Christian but had Muslim participants. She randomly assigned some teams to be Christian only and others to be mainly Christian players, but with 3 Muslim players. Now, for a long time, there's been anecdotal evidence of what is called the contact hypothesis, which says that if people from different groups are put in a situation where they need to work together, their attitudes towards each other and towards their groups will become more accepting. While seeming to make sense, this has never actually been tested in a formal scientific way in a real-world setting. This study was the first to attempt this. So, can playing games together cut through prejudice? The results were just published and are fascinating. Now, because the teams were primarily Christian, remember that only 3 Muslims were on each mixed team, the attitudes of the Christians were evaluated. They were interviewed and invited to participate in different activities about 4 to 6 months after the season ended. For example, they were given a coupon to have dinner at a restaurant in Mosul in a Muslim area, or given the opportunity to attend a soccer training session with a Muslim coach. The percentage of people from the integrated teams versus the control teams that took advantage was evaluated. Now, half of the activities were considered, quote, on the field, like attending the training, and half were, quote, off the field, like going to the restaurant. And the results were clear. All of the on-the-field activities showed marked improvements, ranging from 10% more participating to a staggering 50% more participating in the Muslim training event. For the training, 18% of the control group chose to attend, while 65% of those who played with Muslims on their team attended. Conversely, the off-the-field activities, like going to a restaurant, showed slight or no difference between the two groups. 45% of the control group went to the restaurant, and 55% of the integrated team members, and about 40% of both groups attended a mixed religion party. In one sense, this is disappointing. It shows that the effect is constrained to the activity. It almost feels like a remnant of the magic circle of being on a sports team. You must cooperate, work together, and support each other. This can change attitudes within the group, but you don't necessarily project that outwards to the community at large. It feels reminiscent of the people who are prejudiced against a group as a whole, but have friends or coworkers from that group that they feel are, quote, different than the others. However, this does also have a positive side. Change has to begin somewhere, and if games can provide a common shared experience that brings people together, even in a war-torn area like northern Iraq, that has to be beneficial. Another factor that was looked at was whether those on the Christian-only team would have a negative experience with Muslims on the other team they played. Very often there is a theory that if you give positive preferential treatment to one group, that sometimes that can turn other groups against them. So to take a look at this, the researcher looked at red and yellow cards being given out during the game as a proxy for anger and other negative emotions between the team. She found that there was no incidence of increased penalties when Christians played Muslims, regardless of which religion the referee was. So, while putting people together like this is not a panacea, it is clearly beneficial, and it points to another reason why we should encourage underrepresented people to come to conventions and other gaming events and join us across the table. I'm not aware of a specific study about whether playing board games leads to the same type of shift in attitudes that was seen in this soccer study. However, these results are strongly suggestive that rolling dice with people we may not normally socialize with can help build bridges to bring us all closer together. This is Geoff Engelstein with Game Tech.
Hey folks, just wanted to quick give a shout out to our sponsor for this episode, the Op. And we are talking about one of their games today called Telestrations Upside Drawn. Yes, that's right. The word is drawn, D-R-A-W-N. And it's upside drawn. What that means is one person holds the pen, but they don't move at all. The other person moves the sheet of paper. Well, it's not a sheet of paper. It's a whiteboard. So you have to draw with the board. Have you ever tried that? Not as easy as you might think, but extremely hilarious to watch. And the only thing you can do, you can't say anything, but you can say up and down to the person holding the pen because, like, all right, lift the pen up, and then you move it to another spot and you go around. You can actually see this game being played from my daughters on our video channel, so you can go jump in there and watch how that's played. It comes with 4 sketchboards, erase markers, 1,000 words. So give this one a try. That is Telestrations Upside Drawn.
Questions.
All right, our first questions is from Nick.
Okay.
So Nick has some technical questions for us.
Do you want to run through the questions first? Take them one at a time.
No, I will forget by the time.
Okay.
We'll just do them one at a
Got
time. All right. So what does it mean when the podcast is produced by so on and so on? In other words, what does it mean to produce the podcast?
Producer is such a vague term, really. But I mean, real what I use is that we say it's produced by the 4 of us: Tom, Eric, Maddie, and Suzanne. We talk about what we're doing. We host the show. We put the segments together. We just sort of assemble it and get it all together. We don't specifically split out editing duties. Both Suzanne and I do editing duties for the podcast. But that's generally, we sort of are in charge of making it all come together.
I use editor for editing. Producing has a little bit of editing in, but usually the production is like, I think of it almost as the director of a movie. They're the person, like I say that I produce the Dice Tower podcast because usually, at least for me and mine and Eric, it's my vision on how that particular show is going to go.
Yeah.
I come up with the basic guidelines for the script. I say this is kind of how the show is going to go down and everything. And at the end of the day, I'm the one who presses the button that says, yes, this is good enough to go out for everybody.
Yes. I think for our purposes, as far as our end credits on the Dice Tower, I sort of made producer a wider ranging term rather than splitting out each individual job that the 4 of us do.
In a similar vein, says Nick, what does someone do to assist in the production of the podcast? I think that's almost a self-answered question.
Yeah, they help. So again, this is the definition I'm using for the end credits of the Dice Tower. The list there is the full timers that are doing editing work, background production work, show notes production, website production. That might not be a major task for every episode, but when necessary, they have produced things and helped get things together for the show. So Roy and Mike, who work at Dice Tower Central, are on the list, and our webmaster Rob Searing is on the list as well, because he helps put the description of the show up on the website when it's time to do that.
The next question, I think, is for me. It says, what do you think each host, past and present, of the Dice Tower podcast main contribution and or strength has been? If Eric's is his voice, you must pick a second answer.
Oh, please do.
I don't think you would want your main contribution to be your voice, would you?
I hope not. No, I hope I'm more than just a pretty voice.
Yeah, so Joe was there because he brought a totally opposite voice to me, controversy. Sam was there because... Well, I shouldn't say that. That's why they were there. They were there because they were in the right spot. Sam was same thing. Sam and Joe were very similar in that regard. That was their strengths. They were just different than me and brought a different voice to things. Eric, his main strength has been, rather than being opposed to each other, and we do have very different opinions on games, but a lot of that's pushed just by me. I get to be the... See, when I did the podcast with Joe or Sam, I have to be the straight man to be... Eric is the straight man in our duo.
Yep.
But also, I don't know what it is, but we're pretty good at not talking over each other.
We've just gotten so used to it, really. I wait for you to breathe, and then I talk.
So not much talking is what you're saying.
I just wait for my moment, that's all.
But Eric's also strength is his editing. He's really good at the editing part of things. And he does a lot of the editing work, and it's really helped me out. When Eric first came on and he said he could do this was way back in the day, and said he could do those commercials for me, that was a cool thing. But that, even when I asked him to do the podcast at the beginning, I asked him just because I thought it might be interesting. I didn't have any real strong, like, Eric is the guy. I just thought, like, well, this seems like something that will work out. But that's how I've always felt about various people.
Mm-hmm.
Give them a whirl, see if they're good or not.
Yeah.
Now, those are the hosts that have worked with me particularly. I mean, I've done stuff obviously with Mandy and Suzanne too, but they are their hosts together as their own part of the show, and they bring a completely different voice and different thoughts than even, Eric and I have, some crossover. Mandy and Suzanne had something completely different. They added I gave them, freedom to do kind of whatever format they wanted to do and stuff. And so that diversity of voices is something I really like. I like the more, I might rag on Roll and Writes a little bit, right? But Suzanne champions him. I like that. No, it is a little bit. Just because a new Roll and Write's the same as the last one doesn't mean I have to say it's good. I just played a Roll and Write that's amazing. It's amazing. And I really need to add it to the show notes of the next show. I'll talk about it next time, folks. It's an amazing Roll and Write.
I'm constantly impressed with how Mandy and Suzanne can come up with games that I've never heard of. And I feel like I'm pretty, in tune with what is going on in the industry.
You're not.
Okay, I'm apparently not, because they're pulling stuff out of the woodwork that I've never heard. I'm taking notes while I listen to their episodes going, well, that is a cool sounding game. I'd like to play that.
You're taking notes? You're just such a nerd.
With a pencil and paper that I tuck behind my ear.
Yeah. All right, then Nick says, what has changed the most about the podcast over the years and what's remained the most consistent? I think what's changed the most, the biggest changes we made was at episode 50 when I added in the contributors. And then episode whatever, where we took them back out. But that's because I wanted to, so honestly, one of the things I like to do is I never want to become stale on the podcast. I want us to be talking about stuff. So I guess consistency is that we're trying to always look ahead. And obviously the top 10 hasn't changed since the very beginning. Mm-hmm. changing the most. Mansu and Suzanne coming on board. When Sam came on board, like I said, we changed that.
We've changed schedule a few times. We were bi-weekly for a while, and then we tried different shorter formats to fill in the extra weeks, and we've done some mixing around of that as well.
Sure. It's really easy to allow a podcast to pod fade. That happens to a lot of podcasts, but it's also easy to allow a podcast to go into auto, which I'm always kind of nervous that we can get into.
Yeah.
But hopefully we still talk about games a lot, and hopefully it's something that people still enjoy. What do you find most rewarding about creating the podcast versus any other board game content?
It's an interesting challenge, and continues to be one, to describe a game in a purely auditory format. And I imagine, Tom, you're used to just showing stuff off. This board, look at this.
It is trickier, but I started doing it audio before I did it visually.
It's true.
So there's that. I think I like the podcast because it feels more homey, maybe.
Okay.
No. The video production feels, it's a video production. We're putting on a show. And I know we're putting on a show here as a podcast too. But again, that familiarity with Eric, I don't know, Eric and I, even in a year where we do see each other, it's only like 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah.
But it doesn't feel like that because we talk every 2 weeks.
Yes, it's true. It feels like a comfortable conversation. Whereas, I guess, for the video stuff, you have to be a little bit more aware of the production, of the look and the polish of the whole thing. And, we don't need to be polished here. We can just go.
It's not live. Well, usually. It's not live. I don't know. We're one of the few podcasts where the hosts aren't in the same game group and stuff. So I've always liked that.
Yeah,
that we bring in 2 different things where Eric will talk about a game months before I even see it, and vice versa. I don't know. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, that's all next good questions. So we'll move on.
Steven says, let's see, have you ever refused to play or try a game based on an experience with a designer or game company?
Yes.
No further questions.
Look, most of the time I don't want that. There's some publishers out there. There's a couple publishers out there who do not like me, and maybe, we've had some, I don't know, nothing. There's no one out there like I'm at war with, I guess.
Yeah.
It's easier to talk about it from a designer's aspect. There are some designers out there that I'm not fond of. They've done things that I don't necessarily agree with or approve. Usually that won't stop me from reviewing their games because I'm reviewing the game, not the person.
Yeah.
But I suppose in some circumstances it may have happened, and it may happen in the future. What they have done is so repugnant that I do not know that I could continue to talk about their works of art that they have done. But I do believe that that's up for me to decide and not for others.
Yeah, I can't think of an instance where this has come up specifically for me. I think the only thing, and we've mentioned this before, that has kept me from playing a game is much more subject matter or tone of a game. Occasionally we'll either be asked to review or get a review copy of an adult party game that just goes beyond the scope of what we talk about here on the show, and I just have no interest in playing it. But that's the only time I've walked away without even giving a game a chance.
Sure, but I'm telling you, I've reviewed games from companies, and people email me and said, do you know that they've treated their Kickstarters backers like garbage, or do you know this company supports this in some country and what have you? And I'm like, well, even if I did know that, can I never talk about this company's games? You can boycott a company or a publisher or a designer, I suppose, but it's up to you. Have I done that in the past? Maybe, maybe not. I'm being oblique because I feel like it should be to some degree.
Second question from Stephen is, have you ever found yourself playing through a game, or maybe playing the game a couple times, maybe for a couple years, and realize you've been playing a rule the wrong way?
I don't think he said that.
What is your usual course of action? Do you take back turns or points? Do you just keep playing with the wrong rules?
So this happens a lot. We'll play through a game, and halfway through, I'll be like, oh, look, I found this thing in the rules, and this says this, and we've been playing this wrong. And usually about 75% of the people at the table are like, you know what, that makes sense. That's right. And the one person who's been benefiting from us playing the rule wrong goes, well, that's stupid.
Yeah. Yes.
So it depends. Sometimes I say it depends on, honestly, it's a totally situational thing. Sometimes they'll be like, well, we started that way, we got to finish, or else we'll mess the game up. Sometimes I'll say, well, yeah, we did it wrong, but from now on, we'll do it right. And then one person will say, listen, we've been doing it wrong this one. We got to finish doing it wrong. I'll say, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, but so-and-so got more points at the beginning of the game. I'm like, who cares? It's just a learning game. It doesn't matter. At the end of the day, I want to play it right. But it's only this one person who usually complains about that, and it's only if they're not winning at that point in time.
Yeah, I just try and, if we are going to course correct, just do it at the end of a round after everyone's had the same number of turns, something like that, where you can say, all right, yes, we did that wrong. A couple of turns went a little screwy, but from here on out, we're playing by the correct rules. So you do get a sense of what the actual game is like. So what do you do if it's been like several plays and then you find out that you've gotten a rule wrong?
I'm having a hard time remembering if this has ever happened, but
oh yeah. I mean, maybe it's never happened.
Hypothetically, first of all, you irrationally get angry at the person who tells you that you got the rule wrong.
Yes,
because it's their fault probably somehow for pointing that out.
Yep.
It's like if your fly is down and someone points it out, you're mad at that person.
How dare you, sir? Yes.
I don't know. I'm okay. I do know, but there have been a couple times. I hang on. I need to loosen this rope around my neck. Okay. I still remember the one time I was in Korea and I visited America and I played Liberté with some people. And halfway through the game, I did something, and they're like, "Oh, you can't do that." I was like, "Hey, you can." They're like, "No, it's not in the rules." I opened the rules, and I was like, "Oh no!" And it wasn't even that big of a deal, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't something that changed my opinion of the game. I still really liked the game. I still enjoyed it. It didn't change anything, but it was a. I forget what the rule was at this time. I just remember thinking, "Oh man, I've been playing it wrong all this time. I hope I haven't affected other people's enjoyment of it." Or whatever.
Yeah.
It probably didn't matter. I usually play rules right from then on, unless it's a minor rule, and I'll be like, well, that's just stupid, that rule. But for the most part, I usually trust designers.
This actually came up recently, I think maybe at the last convention I went to. And somebody flagged me over and said, when you taught us this the other day, you did it wrong. I said, wait, what? No, I've been teaching this game forever. And it was one of those... look at the rule. It says it right here, but now I can't remember, so it must not have happened. But yeah, I'll try and you'll course correct and play it right the next time.
Yeah, it's not that big of a deal to me. I don't look back and go, well, those games are garbage that I played before. No, we all had fun playing them.
Yeah.
So, Kevin says, in my experience, when it comes to the one versus many games, the vast majority of players prefer to be the one.
The one.
Even if it's not the majority of the players who do prefer playing the one are very adamant about playing that role to the point where they don't want to play the game at all unless they get to be the one. Kevin says, I personally like playing both sides, but I do get a little annoyed when people are inflexible about taking their turn as the one. Have either of you encountered this issue? Maybe one of you are a player similar to what I've described. What do you think causes this feeling of wanting to be the one? Players like to be unique. Players don't like to cooperate with others, or the player is evil. Straight up, I am this player, for sure.
Okay.
I like being the one, period.
Yep.
What about you?
I enjoy taking my turn. I want to get a chance to take my turn as the one. I think because the one usually has more information than the others. So like the hide and seek style games, they're the ones that are trying to hide somewhere and move around without being seen, or the ones that get to send minions out at the other players, or sort of turn the wheels and the machines that make the game work. And that's fun. You get to sort of sit behind your screen and cackle maniacally and say, let's see how they handle this, which is fun. And then being on the team that's trying to defeat you is also a fun challenge, but it's not quite as maniacal fun. My son loves playing Stop Thief in the one versus many scenario and wants to be the one, and will often refuse to play if he doesn't get to do that. And we have to sort of convince him that, other people also would like to be the one and see if they can stump you. I know you think you have an unbeatable strategy, and it is a lot of fun to know where, you're the one that knows where you are, and everybody else is trying to suss it out, and that is fun. But you have to let other people have that chance too.
Sure, and you do. I think the reason I like it is because many times that person is hosting the game to some degree. Mm-hmm. It's the same reason I like being the dungeon master and stuff.
Yep.
I also, I think other reasons people like to be the one is a lot of these games are designed where the one is playing more than everybody else.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Sometimes they're playing 50% of the game.
Yeah.
But I also think it's really fun to sit there while people are trying to figure out what you're doing. It gives you this, maybe a sense of power, like listen to them. They're talking back and forth.
Yeah.
So I'm not always the one, okay, folks. But if no one argues, it's me.
There you go. Well, I mean, usually if you're the one teaching the game, that's usually the best position to be in. Because
I agree, because then you can help them, and right. Even if helping them hurts you, you'd be like, by the way, you guys didn't mention that you're allowed to scan this area, but you can do that. And yes, that hurts you because you're reminding them of that, but that's fine because you're teaching the game.
As the one, it's always a good opportunity to be the guide as opposed to strictly the antagonist, which I'm sure is once everybody knows the game, then you can maybe buckle it down a little bit and, all right, I'm going to beat you all now. This is where I am playing to win. No more help from me. But I do like to sort of, especially with new players, as the one, guide more than smack down.
All right, let's just have one more question here.
Okay. This is a question from Tom, who's been listening to the Dice Tower podcasts while traveling and has been going in reverse order and listened to episode 651. The Dice Tower library has been mentioned many times, also in videos, so I was already aware of its existence. However, in this episode, you mentioned getting a Magic the Gathering battle box for the library, and you said that since there were little expensive cards in there, you weren't afraid of it being stolen from the library. That sentence suddenly made me wonder, how does the Dice Tower library work? Is it just like a regular books library? People can become members and then just borrow board games instead of books? And with regards to the stealing, does that happen? Not sure if the library has been subject to an earlier podcast, but perhaps this is a nice question for an upcoming one. So one, where is the Dice Tower library, and where do I get a membership card, and when can I check games out?
That's a reasonable thing to ask. I forget sometimes. I'm at the point now where I'll be like to my wife, I'm like, I'm going to the library. And she's like, why? Take a kid with you. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. I'm going to the Dice Tower library. Although we can't go to the library right now. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. Okay. Yeah, so the Dice Tower library is the library for our conventions. That's all.
Yes. No
one can borrow games from it. In fact, I would be probably pretty opposed to that, other than the Dice Tower staff is allowed to take games out whenever they want. And they do.
Oh, that's nice. If you live nearby, I guess.
So if you get a job with me, you have a library card, I suppose.
Okay.
But yeah, it's not a library that we lend out. That would be a whole thing in of itself. It's an interesting idea, but yeah, I would need to hire someone just to handle that, I think.
Yes.
So people take them out at conventions. They have to check them out with their badge so we know where they are. Do they get stolen? Yes. Not very often. But like, for example, my Takinoko game is currently missing both the panda and the gardener.
No.
Yeah, that means those are not pieces that fell on the floor and got missed. It meant someone just took those pieces.
Wow. And this is the big one? The big wooden one?
No, it's the normal one.
Normal size Takenoko.
Yeah, but I have to basically get a whole new game to replace it. I just have to pull it from the library, and we'll get it fixed. And stuff like that happens. We have stuff stolen occasionally. At Dice Tower West, there were a couple games taken, both which have been replaced. So don't worry about that, folks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we got replacements for them, but there's going to be a loss. And then even though I say I trust everyone who comes and love everyone that happens, but I'm not going to let the fear of that happening stop me from having the library there.
Yeah. I mean,
there's always going to be people, like at Dice Tower West, at the very end, we were calling out, bring the games back, and people don't bring them back in time. And so we're just waiting. We're still missing 10 games. And then someone brings a game back, and the person said, hey, you never even checked this out. And the person looked them dead in the eyes and said, so, and walked away. Now, I wasn't there when that happened.
what?
Had I been there, that person may not have a badge ever again at a convention.
Wow.
But people, and that's at the Dice Tower conventions. But don't get me wrong, folks. Don't worry. Oh, people are jerks at conventions. People are jerks everywhere. Everything, that happens too. But it happens very infrequently. So I'm not that worried about it.
If you did have questions about actually having a circulating library of board games, Jen Bartlett does segments on, I think it's Board Game Breakfast, Tom, is that right?
Yes, she does. And yes, she does a lot of stuff in that regard.
Yeah. And she has a circulating library in Manchester, Connecticut of games that people check out.
Alrighty, well, that's the questions we have. Thanks, everybody. Let's jump to our top 10.
It's a Dice Tower Top 10!
The Dice Tower's Top 10 list is brought to you by The Op, also known as USAopoly, at theop.games.
All right, it's time for a companion top 10 to our last one. We talked about fauna, animals, and flora is plants, not technically flowers.
Yes. And I'd say even a slightly wider definition than just plants, too. I would consider fungi to be flora as well.
That's true. Although I will say I thought about it for a while, and if there wasn't something living in the game at all, I cut it. Which one was? Oh, I cut point salad.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because that's just vegetables, which are technically grown from plants.
Yep.
But the plants themselves aren't in the game, just the veggies.
Yeah. I mean, I think I shortlisted point salad, but I think I kept it off my list for that same reason. It wasn't really...
I don't think it's a bad thing to put on the list.
Yeah.
It's just that I want to highlight some other games, that's all.
There was no growing. And if we're talking about flora, I want to have some growing aspect.
Ooh. Well, now you got me all nervous. Well, let's get started. I don't believe...
Maybe...
Do we have any crossover?
Oh, golly, did we not? Yes, there is.
Okay, but not much.
No.
Interesting. Wait a minute. I have the same game on my list twice.
Do you? So you do. I am not here to proofread your list, Tom. That's not what I'm here for.
Oh, I know what it is. All right, now we have more crossover.
Excellent, well done.
We work for you. Wow,
Tom,
we're
look at number 8.
What is wrong with me?
I don't know.
Can't.
Now I am proofreading your list.
Oh, God. I had a...
We're supposed to do this when we're not rolling.
You can cut some of this out, please.
Do I have to?
Number 10.
Let's kick things off with a nice walk through the forest to find some mushrooms. Morels is my number 10. It's a 2-player game about collecting mushrooms. You can, it's got little frying pan tokens. You can grill them up and eat them, or you can sell them. It's a neat little 2-player game. Morels, about mushrooms. Number 10.
Morels about mushrooms. Is that like the tagline?
Yes, it's about mushrooms.
I do like mushrooms. All right. Well, my number 10, as I've carefully thought about for a very long time, Garden Competition. In Garden Competition, now this game is a game that I'm almost afraid to talk about it because it's so out of print. The original printing was a self-published one. Then they made it look a little nicer in a second printing. And now I feel like it could be a Kickstarter, right, if it came about now. But in this one, you have a garden. You make money in this game by cutting other people's lawns. And then you're just trying to plant flowers, but you also are trying to put weeds in your opponent's yards. And those weeds then grow and take over the yard. So the game is all about this. You know, you need some flowers to be in the sun and some in the shade. And the flowers are different sizes and such. It was like it was almost felt like it was ahead of its time. It probably hasn't aged tremendously well, but I thought it had a really strong theme. So that's my number 10, Garden Competition.
Number 9.
Speaking of planting weeds in other people's yards, my number 9 is Flower Power, another two-player game, where one of the mechanisms, as you're placing these domino-style tiles with different flowers on them, you're trying to make groups of like flowers and get as many of them as you can on your side of the board. But you can also flip them over 3 times during the game and play them as weeds, blocking off your opponent's possibilities for growing their flower beds. I really like the game. I have it higher, farther back on the list because it's not as much about growing. I mean, it's basically just a theme over an abstract, but still, it's a lovely game about flowers. Flower Power, number 9.
Yeah, same kind of comments here with my number 9, Cottage Garden. This is a game about, it's basically just a polyomino game where you're placing these different Tetris shapes and making a garden full of beautiful flowers, flower pots, and dead cats. And
dead cats?
Well, I don't know. They don't move.
I don't think they're dead. I think they're meant to be living cats.
You put them in the garden and they never move again.
Wow, that's a dark way to play this game.
I'm not trying to add it in. It just feels like maybe that's what the designer wanted. I personally love frolicking, lively kittens. That is what you call the young cats, right?
Yes, frolicking, lovely kittens.
Anyway, Cottage Garden, though, really is a pretty game. It really is. Has all these different flowers, and when you finish one of these grids, you're like, look at that garden that I have, full of catching flowers. It looks pretty cool. Mm-hmm. It's not so much about growing the flowers per se, but I think it's a nice theme placed on top of this Tetris-y game. Cottage Garden.
I agree. This made my short list, but I think I felt similarly that it wasn't as much about cultivating and more just placing the polyominoes.
Number 8.
Number 8 is an area control card game about flowers called Lotus. There's lots of different types of flowers in this game, and you are trying to place petals of these flowers. Each card represents a petal, and they have little outlines on them so that you layer them in an even pattern that makes, say, a 5-petaled flower of a particular type. And as you're playing these, you will gain credit for doing so, and whoever has the majority when you complete that particular blossom will get more points. And you're trying to score more points than your opponents. But the art produces these really nice-looking flowers. It's a unique style card game. Area control with petals. Lotus, number 8.
My number 8 is higher in Eric's list. I will be sending a strongly worded letter to him.
Number 7.
Number 7 is Scoville. This is a game about crossbreeding hot peppers. You've got sort of a garden board, and different types of peppers will be placed on the board, and then you can send your gardener in between 2 of them to combine them, and eventually, as they get hotter and hotter and more rare, sell them for mondo points. Scoville, number 7.
My number 7 is Arboretum, which I believe, one of the nice things about making these lists here is the names of these make it pretty easy to find this stuff, right? You don't have to worry about, what. I wonder if this game's about trees or not. Then the names have it. Arboretum, especially the second edition, is a gorgeous game. It is a tile laying and hand management game, basically, of different color trees. And it can be pretty mean, actually, as you're cutting each other off or taking the cards other people want. and it's all about placing these trees in front of you and trying to score based on how you put them in front of you. That sounds, I'm really simplifying how it is, but it is not a complex game. The original game looks fine, but the updated game looks amazing. I believe Beth Sobel was involved with the art there. Just fantastic stuff. That's Arboretum.
The Arboretum is a very well-regarded game, but it's also a blind spot for me. I've never played this one.
Number 6.
Number 6 is Bloom. This is an older game that didn't really hit terribly well, but I really enjoy it. It's a tile laying with square card tiles, basically, and you have a particular color of flower, and you have a hand of it. So they're 3x3 tiles, and you've got one tile with only one flower on it, and then others working your way all the way up to a full 9 3x3 full of your color flowers, and you are covering up other tiles and claiming the colors of flowers that you cover up, and you're trying to make bouquets to fulfill orders, but also still protect your gardens so that you're earning points as well. You have a little pet that sort of protects your section of the board. It's tricky, and I enjoy seeing all of those flowers grow on the tabletop. Bloom, my number 6.
My number 6 is also about flowers, but it's called Little Flower Shop. Little Flower Shop of Heart. Anyway, Little Flower Shop is basically that. You're just going to be putting some flowers in some pots and displaying them in your shop. You do so by drafting. It's simply a drafting game. You draft different cards. You're trying to put the right cards in front of you at the right times to score points. And you place them in such a way that it actually builds the flowers and the pots in your shop, which I really like. A simple drafting game, but a lot of fun. Little Flower Shop.
Number 5.
Number 5 for me is Topiary, a game where you build a collective garden of topiary structures represented by these tiles. And those tiles are different heights. So you might have a very tall tree and a small little bush, and you're sort of building this grid and placing your meeples around the outside, and then you score based on what they can see. But the taller trees are going to block stuff that's behind them. So you have to but they're of course worth more points, and you're trying to see as many trees as possible from your perspective around the outside while still playing things and setting yourself up for later moves. Topiary, number 5.
I like Topiary. It's fine. I do think it may be superseded by a couple other games on the list, particularly one of them. But it's good. It's just very, very light. All right, my next one is Blossoms. Now this is a TV show where they had a lot of special episodes.
Is that what this is about? Okay.
No, that's Blossom, right?
Yeah.
Blossoms is a 2-player game, kind of a push your luck style game for 2 players. And again, you're planting these flowers in pots in front of you, and you want to grow them and make them taller to score points. But if you get too much, they can bust and stuff. I really like it. And it has these big cards with beautiful flowers on them. It's a really well done 2-player game. If you've never played it, certainly check it out. That's Blossoms.
Number 4.
I finally got Tom's letter from his number 8, and opening it up, it's just a dead daisy. That probably means something. And
what
that's
does a
because
dead
my number
daisy
4,
mean?
And Tom's number 8 is Tussie Mussy. This is a button-shy wallet game by Elizabeth Hargrave, and the theme is how various flowers mean things that like actually send messages in Victorian, I think a Victorian era. And had like actual messages that if I gave you a dead daisy, or even just a daisy, it meant something. It's really a game about collecting sets and building off of. It's a drafting game where you're collecting a tableau of these flowers and trying to get them to score points by bouncing off of each other and working together, getting synergy from the different powers of these cards. You play over a number of rounds and you sort of draft around the table. It plays very quickly. It's a very small deck card game and insanely portable. Tussie Mussy, my number 4.
Yeah, I like Tussie Mussy. It's a nice little back and forth game. I think it works really well. 2 players. So I recommend it. It's not going to ever be as big and grandiose as the other games from Elizabeth Hargrave, but I think it does really well. Else you can carry it around in your pocket. I looked up Daisy. Daisy means innocence, by the way. So a dead daisy would be loss of innocence.
Okay.
And also, when I looked that up, apparently there's an Australian-American rock band called the Dead Daisies.
I've learned something today.
So did I. Thanks. That's all you. Alrighty, my number 4 is Petrichor, which is a game I really think you would like, Eric.
I probably would. It's another one. This is a blind spot. I haven't played it.
They are kickstarting a new version of it that looks really gorgeous. So by the time that's produced, hits the Dice Tower library and shows up at a convention you're in,
I'll be able to go to a convention.
It may be possible. That's it, right?
Yeah.
Petrichor, you are a rain cloud, and you have these little rain clouds. You move around and you're raining, you're dropping rain down on different areas to grow them, to have these different plants grow. That's the whole goal of the game. It's like an area control game. But water is pretty essential to Flora, and I think this fits on the list a lot. I really like the game. It's unique and interesting, and definitely one to check out. Petrichor. It's spelled Petrichor.
Very cool. Yeah, I do want to try it.
Number 3.
Number 3, we mentioned a little bit earlier in the show. That's Takenoko, and the iconic image of Takenoko is this adorable little panda and the gardener, but the game is really about cultivating these bamboo shoots in 3 different colors, and you're trying to grow them and get them into arrangements that are going to score you points, and the panda collects them, eats them, but that's also sort of a set collection, a harvesting of the plants. So even though the panda is really the face of the game, the real meat of the game is growing these bamboo shoots, and it's a cool system and a very accessible game and an adorable one. Takenoko, number 3.
I really considered putting this on my thing, but I thought, is it more about the panda, or I don't know.
I fell on the side of. In fact, I think we mentioned it when we did the fauna episode, and some people I think the People's Choice put it on their list because of the panda, and I said, I think it's more about the bamboo. So that was foreshadowing.
Oh, and that's why you listen to all the Dice Tower podcasts.
That's why it's all piecing together. We've been laying the clues for years.
Eric, what's the name of a thicket of bushes or a small wood?
A copse.
No, bosque is the word.
Oh, sorry, different game.
My word, I softballed that one to you. Bosque is my number 3. It's even written there on the thing.
I don't read.
Anyway, Bosque is a great game of area control where you put these trees out on the board at the beginning of the game. You're slowly placing trees out, then you'll score points where they are. Then in the second half, you pull the trees off, and you're dropping leaves from these trees, trying to control areas by dropping these leaves. It's a very beautiful thing of seeing the trees come up, and then just all these leaves fall over the place. Wonderful components. A nice abstract strategy game to some degree. My number 3, Bosque.
Yet another gorgeous-looking game that I have yet to try.
Number 2.
I really thought I might sync up with Tom for my number 2, but I did not. It's going to show up on his list in a little bit. So I'll just be here next to this card I bought last turn.
Oddly enough, my number 2 is higher on Eric's list also.
Let's
Go
swap.
figure.
Let's just swap, shall we?
And finally, number 1.
My number 1 was Tom's number 2, and that's Photosynthesis. This is the game about growing trees. You start with little seeds, and you're placing them on the board. They get bigger, and there's a sun that rotates around, and you earn points for your trees catching the rays of the sun. There's that height mechanism. I think, Tom, this is what you were talking about when we were talking about Topiary, and this sort of does it better.
Yes.
In collecting the rays of the sun. If you're a taller tree, you're going to get more stuff. But then, the sun twists around, and then suddenly you're in shadow. And it's a very cool game. And I think of all of and the reason that my number 2 is where it is and the number 1 is where it is I think this just exemplifies the growing aspect just that much more. And so for our Flora list, Photosynthesis takes the number 1 slot.
Yeah, I really enjoy this game on my list for those reasons too. It's neat. The idea of photosynthesis is a great one. And to see it done pretty well in this game, I'm really happy with. It gives you a lot of freedom to do different things. So Photosynthesis is my number 2, Eric's number 1. My number 1, which is Eric's number 2, is about the growing and processing of grapes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's viticulture. Now, I debated a little bit. I'm like, does viticulture fit in the list? I'm like, yeah, you know what? So much of this game is about planting vines and then cultivating those grapes and growing those grapes. That's a big chunk of this game. And you know what? This is one of the best games ever. For purposes of me liking these games, I think I like viticulture almost as much as all the rest put together. That's how much I like viticulture. It's such a great, fun game. Especially with it's confusing, but there's a lot of versions of it out there. You can get Viticulture Essential, but you also want Tuscany if you want the full experience, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But despite all that, great game.
I wholeheartedly agree. I would say that as far as my favorite games, Viticulture outranks all of these. But I really just ranked it just a little bit more because there's more than just the planting of grapes in viticulture. There's a lot of maneuvering, collecting of guests, and fulfilling orders, and it just felt like more than just the agriculture part of the game, although that's a huge part. It is a better game, but for this ranking, it's number 2. Still a fantastic game of viticulture.
All right, let's see what the people said. They're number 10. Viticulture.
All the way to number 10?
Number 9, Morels. Number 8, Bosque. Number 7, Herbaceous.
Yes, another one I haven't played.
Yeah, well, there's also the herbaceous roll and right. There's I think there's like a whole line here.
Herbaceous sprouts, yes.
Number 6, Point Salad, which again I get.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Number 5, Cottage Garden. Number 4, Bonanza. That's about bean farming. It's in the name.
It is very much. I shortlisted it. It almost made my list. I think, again, although you do have fields, it doesn't necessarily feel like you're growing things. It feels like you're collecting things. But, yeah.
Number 3, Takinoko, so people listen to you. Number 2, Arboretum. And number 1, Photosynthesis. We really matched up with the people on this list.
We got most of them, or at least talked about them.
And that, sadly, folks, is the end of another episode. Thanks so much. By the way, remember, you can find out all about the Dice Tower and different things that happen by subscribing to Dice Tower Digest. Just go to dicetowerdigest.com, and we send out a bi-weekly email that tells you about podcasts, videos, different things that are happening with the Dice Tower. So there you go. Anything else you got, Eric?
No, it's great to have power.
Yeah, that's true. It's been a weathery thing, and we're thinking about all the folks out in the areas that got hit by the hurricanes and the tornadoes and stuff. It's been a year for sure.
It has, and
But we'll be here next time. Mandy Suzanne next week. We'll be here the week after that, folks. Stay tuned. But until then, I'm Tom Vassell.
I'm Eric Summerer.
And you've been listening to The Dice Tower.
Thanks for listening. Promotional consideration has been provided by game publishers in the form of review copies of games. This episode, number 673, was recorded on August 28th, 2020. I get to crash Mandy and Suzanne's party next week, and in 2 weeks, Tom and I strive strenuously to whittle down our top 10 games that start with the letter S. Support for this podcast comes from listeners like you. Thank you for spreading the word. And speaking of support, the Jack Vassell Memorial Fund is dedicated to providing support to members of the board gaming community in their hour of need. Find out more about the fund's mission and how you can help at jackvassell.org. The Dice Tower is written, edited, assembled, and produced by Tom, Mandy, Suzanne, and Eric, with production assistance from Roy Cannaday, Mike DeLisio, and Rob Seary. Our theme was composed by Timothy Pinkham. Our cooperative trick-taking game set in the world of Zork, brought to you by The Groove. And you can get the latest on everything Dice Tower at Dicetower.com. We love feedback. Visit the Dice Tower Guild at BoardGameGeek.com. Email us at Tom@Dicetower.com or Eric@Dicetower.com, or follow us on Facebook. And of course, you can find more from the Dice Tower Network, including All the Bits, Men on Board, Cardboard and Wine, Sporadically Board, Board Game Design Lab, Tabletop Game Talk, The Family Gamers, The Portal Gaming Podcast, This Game is Broken, and Board Game Breakfast at DicetowerNetwork.com. Until next time, from all the gang at the Dice Tower, have fun gaming. So we'll be continuing this series. We did fauna, we did flora, so next time it's rocks, right?
Ooh, I haven't even thought about that.
Games about rocks.
Oh.
Box of rocks. Dumber than